1 year into Donald Trump's second term, he is pushing the limits at home and abroad. From talk of acquiring Greenland to new anti-immigration moves. Is Trump exercising power without restraint? Joining me to answer that question is the editor and publisher of The Nation, Katrina vanden Heuvel. Katrina vanden Heuvel, thank you so much for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you for having me.
Katrina, it's been 1 year since Donald Trump took office for a second time. How does this presidential first year compare to his previous one?
This administration, second term, has a playbook. The playbook we knew was coming, playbook 2025, and it has laid down the pillars in these last months for an authoritarian society, whether it's the media or whether it's the way this president conducts foreign policy. I think we see more and more that he considers his global power limited only by his morality. He has no use for international law. There's untrammeled corruption, which we witness every day, but we now see an accumulation. I think it's $1.7 billion in these last months he's accumulated for his family. There's a whiplash effect, Mark. I mean, the flood the zone that Steve Bannon, his aide, speaks of, gives us, I think, a sense of chaos and destabilization that often doesn't allow people to think beyond the despair they feel. Many of his former supporters are seeing overreach, don't like what they're seeing. The polls reflect that, though you have to be careful. So I think it's a perilous moment because part of Trump's flood the zone is also to be, on the rise, infallible. And if he feels fallible, all bets are off.
You talked about this time him having a playbook. Why is there a playbook now? Why wasn't there one before? I mean, what's the distinction?
So the playbook before in the first term, I think, was when he gave the list of Supreme Court justice possibilities to his vice president, who we don't remember much of these days, Mr. Pence. I think there was still distrust, even from Republicans, not true MAGA, who this guy was. And I think Trump's second term has been fueled by retribution, intimidation, because he felt he was rolled largely by the Russia stuff. And I think he came into the second term armed with ideologues like Stephen Miller, whose handiwork we see displayed so brutally in Minneapolis, in Minnesota.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is part of the reason there's been a second term of vengeance, retribution, whiplash, flood the zone. And at the heart of it is the deportation border issue.
I'm glad you mentioned that because there's been such a sharp uptick in arrests and deportations in this administration. We've also seen an escalation in the tactics of ICE. That's the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. I'm talking about harassing civilians, detaining people based on their skin color or what language they're speaking. And of course, there was the killing of Renee Good, which we've been talking about as a nation ever since. Is ICE still strictly an immigration enforcement agency?
No, there's a through line of violence in the Trump administration. I think you see it in the treatment of immigrants, the capturing of people off of street corners, the unwillingness to be sharp about the distinction that there shouldn't be in a way, but between undocumented immigrants who are lawful and the rapists and criminals Trump speaks so wrongly about. But I think it's become a kind of thuggish internal police. And I think the Renee Good episode has reflected how off the wire, the tracks, the whole it's interesting that every hour in these last weeks, you've seen state legislatures, you've seen politicians, political figures who flinched from talking about abolish ICE, speaking. The mayor of New York City just spoke in defense of abolish ICE. I think we need a new framework for security.
Congress is pushing a new framework.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're saying let's limit ICE's power at the very least.
At the very least.
Is that necessary?
Yeah. I mean, the question is, does one need ICE? What is ICE's role? Because the militarization of this administration has extended to the streets of America in ways that I think lead to insecurity and destabilization, not security.
What does our domestic security look like without ICE?
So a secure border and very, I think this social democracy, I know this is controversial, needs a secure border, but not this thuggish former Secretary Labor, Robert Reich the other day called it Gestapo tactics.
Yeah.
And I think what we're witnessing is quotas being selected out of the White House by Stephen Miller. Militarization of cities, coming in and taking people off the streets is not an American tradition. So I think we have to think very clearly about a new framework. And it involves, in fact, going back to the global war on terror and rethinking these institutions like Homeland Defense, which were created in the wake of 9/11.
Yeah.
I think they create more insecurity, less security in cities around this country.
You mentioned Homeland Security. I was thinking about a comment that was made by Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security.
And there's a big impeachment move around here.
Yes.
Congress is moving. The numbers grow every day, those seeking her impeachment, which I think is important as an accountability measure, but it's not the end.
Yeah. I'm thinking about when Renee Good was killed by the ICE officer. Kristi Noem referred to it as domestic terrorism. Not the officer.
No, not the officer, but Renee Good.
But Renee Good.
So everything's upside down in kind of Alice in Wonderland, because those who should be held accountable are being treated with kid gloves, and those who have been victimized are being investigated. And even at the higher level, the Justice Department's investigating the mayor of Minneapolis, those in the city where this blatant obscenity occurred.
Yeah.
The danger, one of the key dangers I didn't mention in terms of the second term, is the expansion of executive power and the expansion of these executive orders.
Let me pause you on that. When you say the expansion of executive power, that's an interesting framework.
It's the hallmark of this administration.
But to be clear, it's not that the law has now expanded Trump's power. It's that Trump is exceeding the boundaries of the law.
So what's happened over the last decades, which is this, the expansion of executive power.
Yeah.
Every president has accumulated more and more power. So the Congress has less. Maybe it deserves less sometimes, but you need a balance of power. The checks and balances in our system have gone out the window. You have a media on bended knee, not independent media, not many media, but the big media involved with regulations, which they need Trump to sign off on. You have institutions like universities are skittish, foundations are skittish. Congress has been in hawk until recently to MAGA doctrine. So it's hard to see how you get a breakthrough. The expansion of power in the White House has grown in these last years, but when it's used by a malign, narcissistic president like this one, intent on defining the rules of global order by his morality and his virtue, and his very dangerous to personalize the executive role and executive power.
Another thing we've seen in Donald Trump's push against immigrants is the idea that he's threatening to denaturalize American citizens. Now, lately he's been focusing specifically on some Somali populations in places like Minnesota, where he's accusing them of fraudulent schemes, suggesting that they're stealing from government programs, doing things to sort of justify the denaturalization process. Now, then there are internal documents from the Trump administration to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that reportedly pushed a monthly quota for denaturalizations.
So underlying the second term is also a culture war. There's a rollback of DEI, there's a rollback of the civilizing advances of our country, and I think there is, in Stephen Miller's dangerous brain, a conception of the replacement theory, and they want to cleanse this country in very kind of Gestapo ways, and these memos lead to that if you follow. Now,
so this isn't far-fetched to you. This is actually plausible that we could see mass deportation or denaturalization of citizens.
I think it's going to slow down in the wake of Renee Good. Maybe it won't, because there's possibility that as the midterms approach, this presidency and his minions around him will jack up what they can to distract.
I want to hang with this midterm election point that you're making, because to your point, when you enter midterm elections, people are thinking about the economy. Voters right now are saying, hey, the prices are too high. 2/3 of voters, including 30% of Republicans, are saying Trump has fallen short on the economy. Will that matter enough? Is he losing support with his own base?
I think he's losing support with his own base. Again, the question comes down to where do they go? Do they sit home? Do they look for someone else? Do they turn to those who have very different ideas of what America is? It's early to tell, but it looks like the numbers are not cratering, but are escalating downwards.
Yeah.
And I think there's a fear. And the danger is what will this administration do? I think there's going to be a purge of mid-level people. And I think
mid-level people where?
In the State Department, in the Justice Department. You've already seen 4 members of the Trump Justice Department resign because of the way the administration's handling Minnesota. We need to be clear about the administration's corruption, the administration's brutality, cruelty, normalizing dehumanization. And I think the affordability issue is key.
There's one challenge with that.
Okay.
As much as people are growing in their dissatisfaction with Republican leaders, polls are saying that voters have slightly less confidence in the Democratic leaders than the Republican leaders.
So I think we're a poor country in many ways. We only have 2 political parties. But within the Democratic Party, you have different coalitions. And I think there will be a battle in many, many states and many races between those who are real about being an opposition party, but putting something on offer. We can't just, you can't just say to people, vote the other.
Yeah.
You have to give them an alternative. And it's a difficult moment, but I think the people in the streets, the people showing that they're fed up, you can build around that. And I think...
But can you build on that if people are also looking at Democrats in Congress and saying they're weak, they're feckless, they don't have a coherent vision? All they're saying is, look, we're not Trump.
Not all of them. I sometimes, when we have editorial meetings and people say Democrats, they're Bernie Sanders Democrats, they're Chuck Schumer Democrats. Can't be that simplistic about it. I do worry that people will vote for restoration, not reconstruction. But I think people are fed up, especially a younger generation. I don't want to be clueless. I understand the forces arrayed are strong and powerful, the money piece. You can see some changes, and there are people running around this country in races from the bottom up that matter. And I believe in the actions we're seeing, like self-mutual aid, communities coming together to assist those who are being harmed by the policies. There's a ceiling, but it reflects a humanity and a part of this country that is worth celebrating.
Another sign for hope for some is that there's a lot of infighting in the Republican Party. I mean, some of Trump's staunchest allies.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking about people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was tied at the hip to Trump.
Absolutely. She was more Trumpian than Trump for a while. And that reflects, I think, a sense of that there's an overreach. And overreach, again, is not a politics. It's not a fundamental rethinking of where we,
And it's very specific foreign policy concerns in her case.
In her case, which is real. I mean, Trump in 2016 ran on a ticket of ending endless war, anti-intervention. What he's done is renewed the stench of intervention with Venezuela. The danger of Cuba looms, Greenland. But, in the end of the day, Greenland looks like it's going to be a transactional deal. And that's what he is. I mean, he's a kind of corrupt, narcissistic deal maker. I don't see intervention in the cards. I may be wrong. But I will say that all this talk about the rules of the world-based order being broken now in Europe, what about Gaza? I mean, you have people now, just up in arms about the breakdown of the rule-based order. Gaza was a clear example of the breakdown. And the UN, the United Nations, is a flawed but indispensable organization. The attempt to defeat the UN is not solely Trumpian, but it's
not just defeat the UN. I mean, some would argue that they're
eradicate,
trying to
completely
eradicate it.
And that sometimes is a bipartisan policy, unfortunately. But I think it's a mistake with this Gaza board he set up. They're asking $1 billion a seat, I think. It's obscenity on steroids. But I can't get excited about the end of the rules-based order because it was whose rules, by what. So the ability to reconstruct a society in a country that is more fair, more just, more prosperous for all reminds me of like the globalization struggles, where the left wasn't against globalization, it was by whom, for whom, of what.
You mentioned Greenland.
Yeah.
But he says he wants to acquire Greenland.
Yeah, like a real estate deal, like transaction, a piece of land.
He says he's going to do it, quote, the easy way.
Or the hard way.
It sounds like a mob
movie.
deal. Yes. Now, he says that the administration wants to purchase the island, though he ruled out using force. Is there any realistic legal or diplomatic path for this to actually happen?
You know, I'm not an expert on Greenland, but I do know that it does impinge on a geopolitical arena that is often disregarded, the Arctic Circle. But, you know, what we've done is unified Denmark and Greenland. Greenlanders were like indigenous community to Denmark, which imposed sterilization on Greenlanders years ago, et cetera, et cetera. What we've done is bring a whole community of NATO, which is an instrument which should have ended with the end of the Cold War, but it's now like reunited against one of its members.
They're sending troops to Greenland. And we're talking the UK, France, Germany, Denmark.
Reality has overtaken satire. It's not funny, but it is a measure of how the media follows everything Trump says. We need like a skeptometer. Every time he issues a statement, we run. And I know people who have Trump derangement syndrome because they've lost bearings, rightly so, because they're so freaked out.
Let's talk about Venezuela for a second. As the world now knows, on January 3rd, U.S. forces abducted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. You wrote an article in The Nation where you said this move was economic imperialism. What do you mean by that?
We don't hear much from the Trump administration about democracy. The extraction of oil as the gain from Venezuela was pretty clear from day one. I mean, the oil community had been briefed, I think, before Americans learned what their government had done. And it's a fossil fuel move. Even though Venezuela's oil would be tough to extract, it has, I think, the largest reserves. So it was clear, economic imperialism, it's in sync with what is not new, though previous incursions into the Western Hemisphere, now under the Donroe Doctrine, Monroe, it's good. It's hegemonic economic imperialism of a throwback kind, and rooted
there's usually
in American
a motivation that's
oil.
But there's the real motivation.
Right.
Some would argue.
But this is not. Well, the regime change motivation was laid low quickly, though that may still apply because the successor to Maduro, the vice president, occupied the position. The woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize did her damage because she didn't give her prize to Trump. So now he's
so Machado's out. Yeah, I mean,
the regime change in Iran.
Well, there are two claims, right? Regime change because it's anti-democratic over there, and then there's narco-terrorism over there.
The narco-terrorism stuff falls apart quickly on examination. I mean, and you don't go to war; you do law enforcement to combat narco-terrorism. But it's pretty blatant that it's not for democracy. That is not a word that traipses across Mr. Trump's lips very often. He made gestures toward an Iran, but that sort of seems to have receded.
To some extent, right? I mean, he's still calling for an end to
the repression.
Yeah, but to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's rule, at some point it did seem like he was going to strike Iran. As you said, he sort of pulled that back.
I mean, we own Venezuela, according to Trump. Who's going to run Venezuela? That was a chilling moment on the stage.
He positions himself as the interim president.
I think he is a kind of attack and run. I mean, this is not a process administration, and it's not taking on countries one by one. I think people get to Trump, and the last person he's listened to or heard from made him determine, for example, Iran is now on a back burner, though it was. I had emails from people saying he's going to bomb tonight, my sources tell me. So the capriciousness, the danger, is something we need to kind of calibrate.
Help me imagine this geopolitical landscape, worst case scenario. There's tariffs imposed on NATO allies.
Yeah, which are already there.
Right. At the same time, there's further disruption in the Middle East due to a potential strike in Iran. What does the world look like, both out there but also internally in the United States, if Trump moves forward in all those ways?
So what's the impact on people in this country? Well, the tariffs, I think, if that becomes his use tool, the tool he turns to is going to impact American consumers. But the geopolitical tumult is going to last for a period of time until there's a new administration. But then you need to rethink the rules-based order not in a nostalgic way, as Canada's Carney said, but in a reality-based world. But you know what this is? This is defined by force, as Steve Miller, I believe, told Jake Tapper. This is an administration that relies not on international law. And in fact, someone once said during the Bush W years, if you end up talking international law, you're losing. But I do think there are norms of civility, and I think it's going to take a return away from this enormous bloated executive power limited only by virtue and his morality. And it's going to take a move away from seeing force as, power, as the best.
If Trump says, look, my morality, as you said, and my mind are the two guideposts here.
His mind is telling him, I suspect, that the overreach is taking him down, or potentially could take him down. And he doesn't want boots on the ground, even though he said he wasn't afraid to. That's a different kind of occupation.
Why? Why does he not want boots?
He remembers Iraq. He claims he was against it from the get-go. But putting boots on the ground is 20th century warfare. I think we're looking at a new warfare, which is drones and robots and AI and transaction, economic imperialism, a la Venezuela. But I think we're going to be looking at that and not boots on the ground, not forces of the night clashing on fields. But it's going to be very focused on possibly force of a different kind. The domestic terrorism piece, which we talked about, the executive order about domestic terrorism, is terrifying because it's about people who are un-American, against capitalism, against Christianity, against this and that. And imagine how that could be used if things in this country get more violent.
I want to ask you to pull your crystal ball out just for a moment. Midterm elections are coming at the end of this year. How do you think they turn out?
I think it's going to be closer than people think, but I do think Democrats will win the House back, and the Senate is possible. You look at Alaska, you look at Maine, Graham Plattner, Peltola, and I think at that point the question becomes, what can you build in as safety nets? And I mean safety nets in the broadest possible way, protecting people, protecting a country from the depredations of the White House and the MAGA. But I think we're going to see splits in MAGA, largely over foreign policy issues.
So more Marjorie Taylor Greens?
More, I think so. Already we see a few of them growing some cojones.
Is it enough to undermine Trump's stranglehold on the Republican Party?
Yes, for now. I mean, this is a process. In midterms, begin that process, heading to 2028, and build out states. I mean, the state issue is an important one because he's penalizing blue states. So build out states, power, build out electoral power, and build movement power too. It's a very, very, we've been through tough times. The takeover of the Republican Party, I think, is going to be a changing story.
You talked about things not changing in certain ways until Trump is out of office.
Yeah. Do
you have any reservation or hesitation or trepidation that Trump won't leave peacefully?
I think we have to say never. Never say never. He's made enough noise about it. There's enough legal scholarship where you could see attempts to justify it. I don't think he's going to make it, though. I mean, I'm not one of the first to jump on health issues, but I think there are some serious health issues. I know it's in violation of something called the Goldwater Rule, that you need to examine the patient firsthand. But there's enough scrutiny of his behavior that I think not only are people exhausted, but I suspect he's weary of his histrionics.
If Trump stays healthy and he remains in office for the remainder of his term, how effective do you think domestic politics and international institutions, diplomatic and legal, will be in curtailing Trump's power?
I think we're seeing an international cohort determined to restrain Trump as much as it can. That, I think, is possible. I think at home, we're seeing movements gain some strength in demonstrations, but I do think the midterm election is the short-term goal, to restrain, have one body of the Congress to check and to lay out alternatives, to make noise, to travel the country and meet, talk to people. And I think people are despairing, but at the same time, they're open to those who see a different path.
Katrina vanden Heuvel, thank you so much for joining me on UpFront.
Thank you.